Hi everyone and welcome to Life Change TV. I'm Zoe B and today I have got with me Martha Hanson. Martha is a brilliance coach, a speaker coach and an EFT practitioner, and today she's going to be sharing with us a little bit about her career but also about how her life changed very dramatically a couple of years ago now. Welcome, Martha.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing currently.
For work, is that what
Yeah.
I'm doing for work currently?
Yeah.
Okay. So my name is Martha, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina, in the States, with an A, not an N, like we were talking about earlier. And as you mentioned, I'm a coach and an EFT practitioner, and I really love helping people who are talented and smart but feel really stuck in their lives and just kind of don't know how to move forward. I help them really identify their old programming, their beliefs, so they can break through and just step into their life with purpose and confidence and joy and essentially being more of themselves. And I am particularly really enjoying working with primarily entrepreneurs with public speaking and kind of claiming their voice and learning how to speak with confidence and connect with their audience. And I'm having a lot of fun with that right now too.
Great. And I've heard that public speaking is the number one fear. Is that right?
It is. People would rather die than speak in front of a group. That is a pretty common, you can find people who will say that. So it's definitely an area that people can relate to, that struggle, you know.
Yeah. And do you find that there's a common reason why people fear that so much? Because it seems quite irrational almost, doesn't it?
Yes and no, in the irrational. There are a few really common things that help almost anybody with public speaking, that it's like a real surface level to start of, say a simple reframing that almost everyone gets nervous. That's the words. There's the anxiety, you're sweating, however your body's reacting. And it's, if you really think about how nervousness feels in your body, what the actual physical sensation is, it feels almost exactly the same as excitement.
Ah.
And so we do reframe and we do work around that on how is it that we're actually perhaps excited to speak versus nervous. That is something that almost everybody benefits from, no matter where they're coming from. And then it can be a huge variety of reasons. Because some people, it goes back to the way that a memory in their past where they were told that not to speak out, and other people have a super strong inner critic and they don't speak because they're afraid of what everyone else is saying. And so it's a real interesting mixture. And I guess for me personally, I think that public speaking is the apex of being seen and vulnerable and who you are, and that's scary to all of us whether or not we're aware of it. So it kind of highlights that part of, if there's something that we consciously or unconsciously don't want other people to see about us, it makes us nervous when we get in front of a group.
Right, yeah, because you're really vulnerable, aren't you, I guess, when it's you kind of exposing yourself to a group of others.
Very vulnerable. And that's why some people who present a lot love PowerPoints. Because then they kind of hide behind the PowerPoint, right? It's not them that's actually speaking. And it's an effective way of getting information across, and it's also not the most charismatic or entertaining way to share information.
That's true, isn't it? Because PowerPoint can be useful as an assistant, but some people use it as a bit of a crutch.
Yeah.
So important to let you be in the limelight rather than the PowerPoint slides, which is probably what people are avoiding.
Right. Yeah. Not consciously normally. That's not normally. They don't think that normally intentionally. Like, I'm going to use the PowerPoint slides so that I can hide. It's not a conscious thing happening oftentimes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And do you find people get nervous about different types of events? So some people might get nervous about large events, whereas others might be more intimidated by smaller events.
Yeah, because it does vary depending on where that person is. Like, I'm actually running a class series right now, and I have people in the class who are relatively comfortable with public speaking in a certain size, and then for them, when they get on a bigger stage, they totally fall apart, and and that transition is hard, and it's the other people who like just standing up in a networking meeting is really hard for them. And so it is the variety, and some of it depends on just what history the person has come in with, kind of speaking beforehand. A wallflower to being seen, or a good speaker to a great speaker is often a similar pattern at play, just a different place in the development.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. So, I mean, things are obviously great for you right now, but let's talk a little bit about your past. And you had a very specific period in your life that was quite challenging, and your life completely changed. Tell us a little bit about that.
I like to call it my the two best decisions that I've ever made in my life, because it's where I am today. And the first one of those decisions is that I got married when I was relatively young to someone that I met. We were married within 3 months, and part of the decision to marry him was that I had felt this emptiness my whole life before then, and I was searching, and I used to have this phrase like, I'm going to feel full of life. And when I met him, it was the first time in my life that I'd experienced. I felt buoyant and happy and joyful, and just thought, oh my goodness, here it is. And so I dove into the relationship with him, and unfortunately I was lying to myself a little bit, because even though I was happier than I'd been before and feeling more like myself than I ever had before, I was still plagued by sort of this self-doubt and not knowing what to do with my life and feeling stuck and lost underneath it. And of course, it didn't take too long for that to manifest within our relationship. And I had expected him to be the answer, and he wasn't. So the second best decision that I've ever made was choosing to leave him, which was actually harder than anything I've ever done before. And part of it was that I thought, because I knew that it was the right thing for me to do. I was really clear that my growth was going outside of the relationship, and we tried to make it work and we couldn't. But because I was the one causing it, I thought that it would be better once it ended. And instead, I basically fell off the deep end. I went bottomed out in a way I didn't think was possible. Essentially, if it weren't that I'm pretty stubborn, I had some people in my life who cared about me a lot, I might still sort of be there. And if you really think about a moment, and there was a moment where I remember sitting on my porch, and it was, at this point, it was not even so much about the divorce. It was just about, I had never risen out from it, before. I was sitting on my porch, and I was writing my journal, and I remember it occurring to me that I just didn't care if I was alive the next day. And that basically scared me. It scared me so much, because it's not who I am. It's not anything that would have ever crossed my mind. And that was really a moment where I thought, I'm dealing with something that's a lot bigger than me. And, now I'm going to see what I need to do about it. And started both, some medical support, and then also dove into just an intense amount of introspection, because when I really got real with myself, I could see that how I was feeling had been there my entire life. It just hadn't gotten that bad before. And so for me, the thought was, what is the underlying belief or reason, or, what is it underneath all this that's brought this to the surface? Because I don't want to do it again. And it's worked, because I'm here now, and I really like my life now, and I do feel, I do really get to wake up feeling full of life most days, which is, what I used to imagine doing when I was a teenager in high school. And even on bad days, because there's still bad days, I'm still full of it. I'm full of feeling bad, which is just presently experiencing all of life, and it's wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your marriage almost placed a magnifying glass on these hidden behavioral patterns that you hadn't yet noticed or weren't aware of. So did you go through a period of self-awareness or expansion to notice that? Or was it just that you kind of, things got so bad that you were forced to look at that?
It was kind of a continual back and forth process, to be honest. There was, through the process of deciding to marry him, there was an awareness, and then it was good or better for a while. It took us quite a while to actually decide to get a divorce, even though I knew inside of me that place that knew way earlier, but I had so much learning to do, and that was a lot of back and forth of the awareness of the, kind of back and forth, and so yeah, it was a little bit of both. It was kind of ongoing, and it just felt like whenever I was ready for the next layer, it kind of showed up of like, oh my goodness, and I've been doing that. And even now sometimes I almost forget that I was married, that I had that happen, because my life is so different. But when you start looking at patterns in your life, which I still do, on a regular basis, because life is good, but life is constantly evolving and changing, and every time you up-level your life, all that stuff comes back up, and you're looking at it again. I have moments where I'm like, oh my goodness, that was in that relationship, and I've just seen it now for the first time, that there was a pattern somewhere else. So I guess it's a gift that keeps on giving in a way.
Yeah. So I'm interested in how you came to the decision that you definitely knew it wasn't working for you. Were you quite strategic about that, or were you intuitive? You mentioned that you went into that place of knowing. Like, how do you know that it's the right decision? And I'm sure that would have gone over and over in your mind.
Yeah, within the relationship, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, I also do remember this moment. Just like any relationship, or anything that we really do in life, there's good times and there's bad times, and there had just been a building of patterns, and it was getting harder and harder. And I had moved across the country with him to a new place where we didn't know a lot of people, and my sister came to visit, who I'm very close with. And there was an evening, he was at work, and I was talking to her, sitting in my bed in my bedroom, and I was talking to her about what was going on. And that's when I remember that moment of feeling it in my body, of just like, this isn't working anymore. And it was almost 2 years later that it was finally time to let it go. So that's the piece that I do remember, that moment of knowing. And I had a lot to learn from him in the relationship still. So even though I knew that it wasn't going to last for forever, it didn't mean it was over right then. Which is really hard especially when you're going through challenging things. I have a friend who said once, like, just because you know the song is going to end doesn't mean you don't listen to it. Right?
I love that.
And yeah, because with a job or a relationship, just because you know there's an end doesn't mean you don't play it out all the way, even if it's hard. And I feel like that was part of what happened. I had that moment of realizing it was going to end, and then needed to do the rest of it.
So you needed to process the lessons and everything else before you could actually make that final decision.
Yeah, or else I would have just, attracted the same thing back into my life to learn again.
Right.
How it goes in my world, at least.
So can you remember, how did you feel once it was finally over? And is that the point when your life really changed? Or did it take a bit of time?
Once it was technically over in terms of the papers were signed, there's so many different energetic phases of being over, and that was the final straw, because even though he and I hadn't been speaking, he'd moved away, we knew it was what was happening, there was still a difference what happened. And that's almost what was most surprising, is that it didn't get better right away. It almost got worse. That was, and who knows how long the process, and it was essentially dealing with just depression, which is normal in that place, but the kind of hopelessness that just seemed to make no sense. And I had been trying to get my feet back up underneath me for so long that it seemed like, all right, maybe when it's finally done, maybe I'm still holding on to some of it. And when it was finally done, it was actually like taking the last jump off of the cliff, and then you're just free falling. And so yeah, it took a little from there, but it was also well worth it. Just not what I thought when I went into it. Like, I really was it just seems to make sense that when you know it with your head and you understand why you're doing it, and you know it's right for you, that it's going to support you in feeling better. And that's not, and it's actually, I see that in a lot of other areas with my clients too. Just because they know that it's the right thing to do, it doesn't mean that it's actually the easiest thing to do, or that it actually often means it's the harder thing to do. So yeah.
Wow. And what do you think your biggest learning was from that experience then?
Oh, my biggest learning. Oh, goodness. There are so many, Zoe.
Top three.
I think probably one of the biggest takeaways that I was even aware of as it was going on, even though I couldn't quite connect to it, is that it was the takeaway that it is possible to really live feeling with that buoyancy and that joy and that full of life, and that it's never going to come from outside of me. It's never something or someone or something I do is going to give me. That it has to be sourced from within me. And that process of going inwards and doing that inward self-reflection, it can be messy, but the payoff is huge, because then I'm carrying it with me wherever I go, And I think that would probably be the biggest thing that that experience taught me.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. Huge.
Yeah, it is huge. It's so simple. When you say it sounds so simple, and it's also not simple at all.
Yeah, I often find that's the most powerful things are very simple, though. It's almost like we overcomplicate things when really things are quite simple, and we just need to get to that place of simplicity and stop the mind from, interfering and overcomplicating and overanalyzing and tying us up in knots, and we often end up coming back to where we started. But it's still a process that sometimes we need to go through.
Yeah. Exactly.
So what would you say for other people who might be watching this now that are going through a similar experience, where perhaps they're in a relationship or they're in a situation where they don't feel like things are right, but they're not quite sure what to do or how to cope with that?
Asking for help to begin with, and whether that's joining the New Year's Revolution or a coach or a therapist. Friends and family are good, and they have a hard time being there kind of unconditionally without judgment for you. That someone a little outside of your picture can help a lot. And let's see. It's really messy. Like, you're in the middle of it now, and it's confusing and it's hard, and you know that something needs to change, and you don't know what needs to change, and it feels like it's never going to end. And it is going to end. It will change. That does happen. And kind of a motto that I live by in other ways is that as long as you're trying something different, that's how you're going to get out of it. So it is, if you're feeling stuck, if you're doing whatever, and it can be something that's just a tiny bit different. Like, sometimes people think they need to do something huge different in order to get the change. And if you're stuck in a pattern, if it's one little tiny thing different, and if that doesn't work, then you try something else. And if that doesn't work, you try something else. Like, with a partner, I've heard it told, ask for your needs 1,000 times, 1,000 different ways. If you haven't before, and then once you've done it 1,000 times, 1,000 different ways, and they either can't hear you or they can't provide those for you, then you go somewhere else. But it's like, try it a bunch of different ways, because somewhere you're going to hit the area that has a little opening, and that's going to lead you to another little opening, and that's going to lead you to another little opening. And it's so hard when you're in the middle of it to have the perspective. It's really challenging. I can remember being in the middle of it and kind of being aware that there was like this bigger thing playing out around me, and also just not having the emotional capacity to connect to that. But from the outside, it does get better. It does, and like there's so many ways to move beyond it, and I just love it. Everything, the world is growing and changing so much. There are also so many just incredibly different paths to help you. Like so many different ways that if someone tells you it's a therapist and you're not interested in seeing a therapist, but you're willing to, start seeing a chiropractor even, or, go to an acupuncturist, or there's so many different avenues. And just doing that little kind of thing can help break stuckness. Yeah.
Wow. So it's almost like a numbers game, and it's about just trying lots of different things. So it's not that there's one right or wrong answer. It's just try lots of things and see what works for you.
Yes.
Yeah. I like that.
And there's no right or wrong answer. That I remember working. I hadn't thought of it until you just used those words. That I do remember working with that a lot with. Through my separation of like, I wanted to figure out what was the right thing to do, and having to let go of the fact that there really is no right or wrong. There's just you being a person moving forward in your life, doing the best that you can. And it's also like right by what standard? Yeah. Like who set the rules for it to be right or wrong? And that was a really big thing for me to wrap my head around, and I still forget about it. But there is really no right or wrong answer, and to even just let yourself off the hook that whatever happens is exactly what's happening, and it's not right or wrong. And if you can take that judgment piece out of it, it actually takes a lot of the stress out of it, because you're not dealing with kind of it's a trauma, the stuckness or the whatever you're going through. Not only are you dealing with the event, then you're also dealing with all of your self-judgment about it and beating yourself up. So you're like doing it twice to yourself if you're judging yourself. So if you can take that piece out. But yeah, that was something that was really hard for me, was to learn that it wasn't right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's just what was. Yeah.
And it can almost paralyze you, can't it? Because then you don't want to take any action for fear of failure. I don't want to make the wrong decision. But once you remove that, that's a really interesting way of looking at it, then it frees you to just take action and just try different things and see what works.
Yeah. And not only with this, but with other things in my life, as I have gotten better to sort of listening to that own, everyone has an inner compass, an inner guidance, and intuition. A lot of us aren't connected to it, but as I've gotten better at listening to that, is that often that is it's a lot less logical than my brain. So what sounds right, what I can figure out is right, will feel totally opposite sometimes than what kind of gives me that sense of relaxation or that pull forward. And that's been a challenge for me to learn, of like, when is that mind tool an important tool to use, and when is it a tool that's trying to do a job that it's not made for? Basically.
So it's about balancing the two, did you say?
Yeah, it is. And that's like a lifelong process.
Let me know when you figure that one out.
I think that's like a lifelong process.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I love what you were saying earlier as well about doing something different. And one of my favorite quotes is by Albert Einstein, who said, a definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results. And it is this whole concept of, we can get ourselves into these patterns and these struggles, and we just keep, hitting our head against a brick wall, and we're getting so frustrated, but we're not trying anything new. We're just doing the same thing, and we're expecting things to change. But why would they change if you're not doing anything different? You're not trying something new.
Yeah. And, this ties to you're just reminding me of another conversation I recently had about the concept of, like, the word impossible. Yeah. That's something I still use that word. I find where that comes up, but it's impossible. So-and-so will never change. I'll never make that much money. Whatever it is, it's impossible. And what you're actually doing with the word impossible, like on an energy body system, is that you're essentially like closing your seventh chakra, your openness to infinite possibility. Yeah. Right? And so when you close if you think about your system as like there's energy coming in, there's energy going out, that when you close off one of the circuits, you are just recycling energy because it's not going up or down. And that's a different way to think about what not doing, being impossible, or you're doing the same thing expecting different results because you said it's impossible and you haven't, you've closed off that possibility of the 1.0009%, whatever, the tiny, tiny percent that something might be different. It just needs to be a tiny, tiny percent to still be moving new energy through the system, basically.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really interesting way to look at it. And I've actually studied the neuroscience of language like that, and it's interesting because it's exactly the same in that when you use language like it's impossible, you actually shut down parts of the brain that are used for solution-oriented thinking. So you can't find the solution because, like you said, with the energy, you're closing off certain parts of the brain that would be used to actually find solutions. It's like you're narrowing your vision almost, isn't it? Yeah.
Cool. I love when the same thing happens.
It's all the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just different words. Wow, that's so interesting. Well, thanks so much for sharing that story. Let's move fast forward a little bit. How did you get to where you are now then? How did that all develop from going through that life-changing experience to what you're doing now?
So much inspection. And a lot of, actually, it's part of why I use EFT, or emotional freedom technique, in what I do now, because that was a tool that I actually discovered for myself personally at the beginning of the separation process that really changed the way I moved through things. I think I moved through it with a little bit more grace than I would have otherwise, which it wasn't very graceful, but it would have been worse. And then, have definitely just found a few different people whose kind of the work that they teach, particularly I really, right now am involved. I study with people who kind of combine tapping as a technique, but learning a lot about the chakras and the energy system and the really different way to think about how we'll take vows in certain chakras, which are basically like super beliefs, and it's all just a framework. And so a lot of that was just finding a framework that made sense to me to sort of dive in with, and then just I did make a pretty dedicated effort of just saying, I don't know how to do it, I don't know where it's going to come from, and I know that there are things for me to take care of, and I'm just going to keep looking, and I'm going to keep looking, and when I find something that works, I'm going to use that. And I mean, just kind of sticking with it, basically. And then even to work, what I was doing prior to what I'm doing now is I worked as a massage therapist for a number of years. I still have my massage license, and that was an area that I also felt stuck there because I was good at it and I enjoyed it. And there also is I could just tell that I wanted to incite more permanent change, like a different kind of permanent change in people's lives, that not only would change one life, but if I change your life, then everyone you come into contact with changes, you change their lives a little. And I get really excited about that. The big picture, which is kind of weird, hard to connect to. And it wasn't happening for me with the massage. And it was kind of like, well, what's everything that I've learned? What do I do? What do I do naturally? What is everything in my life kind of led me up to? And it's just been like, oh, well, yeah, it's like right in front of you. So go for it. and that's I guess how I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah, wow. So tell me a little bit more about your public speaking courses that you run, because they sound very interesting.
Yeah, so they're teleseminar classes, so they're on the phone, and you can do the replays afterwards. And right now I'm running them on a every 6 week schedule, and so it's 4 classes plus a bonus class, and each week we talk about a different C of public speaking. So confidence, communication, charisma, and content. And we do exercises kind of focused around each one of those. And once you sign up for the group, there's also like a secret Facebook page where we do a certain amount of sharing. I have people do video work on the page because video is, not only is it just big in the world now with online and everything, but it's really triggering for some people because it's really hard for them to just even share themselves. So it's a really interesting way to be virtual and still sort of get to connect and have some of that in-person triggers through public speaking.
Great. And people can practice that as well, can't they? So you don't even need an audience necessarily for that.
Yeah, don't need an audience. And video is definitely a really interesting way to do it. So yeah, each week we kind of dive into each one of those different topics with, there's kind of different exercises that, I don't need to go into, but those are the 4 areas that I find are hit a lot of the big issues. And then, there's a version where you can just do the group call, or there's a version where you can get a couple private coaching sessions with me in addition to the class, which can be super, super helpful because, we can really get into like the exact issue that is going on for you, which is a little harder to do on a group call, but is sometimes makes that last little bit of difference to just taking you all the way to the wow factor of getting up and speaking. So
wow. So if you had people who literally would get nervous, sweaty, anxiety about talking to small groups, kind of go from that to presenting at very large stadiums, or what's happened from a results perspective?
I don't know any from large stadiums yet, but I think I should have been doing it long enough. Like, give me another year or two, and I'll have someone who have done that. The one that just popped into my head when you asked that question is I'm a member of a local networking chapter, and there's about 45 people in our group, which is a decent amount of people. And there was someone who came to visit the group who it was literally like she stood up and she even said, like, all she could get out of her mouth was like, "This is really hard for me. I don't know what to say." It was literally like she just couldn't even hardly say what she said. And I made a point. I was actually doing a few kind of testing of a few things and just asked her. I said, "Yeah, you might be a perfect candidate." She actually joined our group and 2 sessions with me, and she's like her voice doesn't shake. She's fun. She smiles.
Wow.
She always knows what she's going to say, and it's just an incredible difference. And that's still a small setting, and it's a little bit different too to have you only have a minute to say something versus like a 10-minute thing. But that was a pretty cool and obvious, I think, for both her and I, because we kind of share the group of like, wow, that was like, you couldn't even get your name out 2 weeks ago. And now she's fine. And she's one of those people, and this is often true, is that people one-on-one, they're confident one-on-one, and then it's just, there's something about translating it up to the bigger thing. And so she was someone who one-on-one was like, I know what I'm talking about. So we kind of took care of the things to take her up to, now she's that way with us as a group, even in 40 seconds.
That's incredible. And that was in as fast a time period as 2 weeks.
Yeah, we just did 2 sessions. We did 2 private sessions together, which is like 2 hours, basically.
Wow, that sounds incredible. So how can people find out more about this? Can they go to your website?
Yes, my website is a great place to start, which is marthahansen.com, and Hansen is Hansen. There's lots of information there. I don't believe yet. I'm working with someone right now who's kind of redoing my website, so we're in that stage of, I don't quite remember where things are. I don't think we yet have a link set up to actually information about the Say What boot camp that I run, but there is a link. People can actually register for, I do a free 30-minute consultation, whether it's for the boot camp or just for private sessions with me. That's something that they could do. My email address is also on the website, which is martha@marthahansen.com. Those are probably the 2 surest ways to sort of touch base and get in contact with me. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I thoroughly encourage everyone to jump online and book in a session with Martha, because she clearly knows what she's talking about when it comes to speaking, and you have such great energy, Martha. Honestly, it's been so lovely to chat to you today, and I just want to say thank you for sharing your very personal story with us, and I'm sure the viewers will get a lot out of that in terms of inspiration if they're facing a similar challenging period in their life. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Zoe.
Thank you. So thanks everyone for watching. We will be back in a couple of weeks at Life Change TV, where we'll be interviewing more experts who will be sharing with us their life-changing stories. Until next time.